Most people look at hospitals as places of safety, a place where life begins and sometimes life ends, a controlled environment where healing takes place. But over the recent years in the United States, medical facilities are increasingly becoming the scenes of violence, like this past weekend at Brookwood Medical Center in Homewood, Alabama, when a young mother, 24-year-old Precious Johnson, was gunned down in her hospital room in the maternity ward just hours after giving birth, in her hospital room, in a maternity ward, among other new mothers and their infants, mothers who had to listen to Precious Johnson be murdered. And this tragedy immediately raised questions. People began asking, how safe are our hospitals? And we're going to talk about all that tonight on the porch with Munchies and Murder. When I asked the question, why is violence in medical facilities rising and what can we do to stop it? One of the main pieces of equipment used to detect weapons are metal detectors. We have them in our courthouses. We have them in our airports. We have them in a lot of schools, but only a third of hospitals have metal detectors. And the hospitals that do have metal detectors have them located almost exclusively in the ER. It is very rare to find a metal detector located in a maternity ward in any hospital in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that maternity wards don't have security. They do. But that security is in place to keep infants from being taken. It is not to stop people from walking in with weapons. And all of this is happening while violence continues to rise in medical facilities. Now, I came across something that truly startled me while I was researching this. Healthcare workers make up only 10% of the workforce, but they make up almost half of the victims of workplace violence. That is a startling statistic. Many doctors, nurses, and hospital workers say that they have been the victims of attacks, of assaults, and even shootings. Now, there are four main areas in hospitals where violence is seen: the emergency room, psychiatric department, the waiting room, and the maternity ward. And all of those areas have risks, but the maternity ward has unique risks. Things like domestic violence, custody disputes, and disagreements amongst family members often spill into the public in maternity wards, and very often, when emotions are high, violence will erupt. The maternity ward, the place where life begins. It should also be one of the safest places to be. So now we've come to a point in history where hospitals across the United States are having to face a challenge that nobody even knew would exist a generation ago when most of these protocols were put in place. And again, we're not just talking about patients here. Healthcare workers experience a disproportionate amount of workplace violence, more than any other profession, more than law enforcement officials. These security measures will protect both patients and staff. We know that violence is rising in medical facilities across the United States, but they pose a unique security situation. They're meant to be open 24/7. People are meant to have access to them when they need them. So now let's talk about some specific incidents that have occurred at medical facilities across the United States. The Tulsa hospital shooting, June 1st, 2022. It took place in the Natalie building in the orthopedic clinic. 45-year-old Michael Lewis had had back surgery in May of 2022. He believed that that was the reason he was still in pain. So he entered the orthopedic clinic in the Natalie building that day with a firearm and opened fire. Michael murdered 4 people: 59-year-old Dr. Preston Phillips, 48-year-old Dr. Stephanie Hewson, 40-year-old Amanda Green, and 73-year-old William Love. Michael turned the gun on himself and committed suicide as law enforcement officials closed in. October 22nd, 2022, Methodist Dallas Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. 30-year-old Nestor Hernandez, a man who was on parole for aggravated robbery and had an ankle monitor on, entered the facility with his girlfriend because she was in labor. He brought a weapon inside with him. He became angry and accused staff of not taking care of his girlfriend, not checking on her often enough. So he opened fire in the maternity ward and murdered 2 hospital staff. 45-year-old Jacqueline Pakua and 63-year-old Katie Flowers, both murdered by a man that was able to walk into a maternity ward with a gun. August 22nd, 2025, Detroit, Michigan, Henry Ford Hospital. 53-year-old Mario Green walked into Henry Ford Hospital and murdered his ex-wife. 40-year-old Latricia Green was working in the basement of Henry Ford Hospital that day. Her and Mario had been divorced since 2018. Latricia said that Mario had become increasingly violent in the months leading up to the murder, so she had asked for a protection order. When Mario walked into the hospital that day, he told people that he just wanted to take something to Latricia. When Latricia saw Mario, she asked him to leave. That is when Mario pulled out the weapon that he had brought inside the hospital with him and shot Latricia multiple times, murdering her there in the basement of Henry Ford Hospital before fleeing the scene. 53-year-old Mario Green, another person who was able to walk inside of a hospital with a gun. February 22nd, 2025, UPMC in York, Pennsylvania. A mass shooting takes place. At 10:38 a.m. on February the 22nd, 2025, Archangel Ortiz walked into the ICU at UPMC with a 9mm handgun and zip ties. He killed 2 people and injured 7 others before law enforcement officials were able to stop him. Archangel was angry about the death of his wife, and he had decided that he was going to send as many people from the medical facility that couldn't save her with her as he could. So again, Archangel, another person who was able to walk into a medical facility with a gun. All right, now that we've talked about a bunch of individual incidents and you kind of understand that this violence inside of medical facilities is rising across the United States, let's talk specifically about Alabama in and around the Birmingham area, because there's only a few hospitals left that even deliver babies. So let's go over the security that we can find in those hospitals. Let's start over there with the UAB Women and Children Center, because it's one of the largest maternity wards in the state of Alabama. They got the typical security, locked doors, you got to be buzzed in, you need a badge, RFID chips for the infants. They do have an armed police force at UAB, but even UAB does not have metal detectors going into the maternity ward. So let's move over and talk about UAB St. Vincent's. You know, they got a maternity ward over there, and it's pretty good. They got the standard security, though. There are no metal detectors in the maternity ward at UAB St. Vincent's. And they also do not have a police force that is armed over there at UAB St. Vincent's. They got the usual stuff, the locked doors, the RFID chips, the badges, getting buzzed in, you know, the usual stuff. But again, no metal detectors in the maternity ward at UAB St. Vincent's. Now, I want to mention here, back in 2012 over there at St. Vincent's, now that was before UAB bought it, but there was a shooting on the property of that hospital. So now let's talk about Brookwood Women's Center, where that shooting occurred this past Sunday when 24-year-old Precious Johnson was killed in her hospital room just a few hours after she gave birth by her husband, 19-year-old Kenneth Terry. Now, Brookwood does not have any metal detectors going in to the maternity ward, and the Women's Center is not locked. It is unlocked 24/7. Now, the doors going into the maternity ward are locked. I have been let in by people when there wasn't somebody at the desk, but they are, in fact, locked. They do put chips on the babies. When I told you I could walk out of there with a baby, I was only joking, kind of. I was kind of joking. Now, there's Shelby Baptist. There's also Walker Baptist. There's also Princeton. There are also some hospitals in North Alabama. There are other hospitals where you can have a baby at in Alabama. None of them, 0 maternity wards in the state of Alabama have metal detectors. They don't even have armed security that stand outside of the maternity wards with a wand that checks for weapons anywhere in the state of Alabama. So after all this, one starts to ask, why don't hospitals have more security? Why don't hospitals have metal detectors? Well, there's a few different reasons for that. For one, in Alabama, they're not required to. Every single hospital that was asked why they don't have metal detectors stated it was because they are not required to do so. And it isn't really an age issue when it comes to some hospitals, because we've had hospitals built around the Birmingham area in the recent years since gun violence in medical facilities became a thing. And even they don't have metal detectors when you come into the hospital. So when these hospitals are asked why, part of the reason is appearances. They don't want people to walk into a hospital and see armed security or metal detectors. They said that they think that it will make people feel like they are not safe. But people know they are not safe in hospitals anymore. We are seeing more and more reports in the news of violence that occurs in these medical facilities. Now, some hospitals cite cost as the reason they've not put any of these security measures in place. But the cost of these security measures are far less than some of the lawsuits that resulted out of this violence that has occurred in medical facilities across the United States. Kind of like the lawsuits that came after the 2010 shooting at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, or the lawsuits that came after the 2017 shooting at the Bronx Hospital, or the lawsuits that came after the 2018 shooting at UAB Highlands. Yes, the one located in Birmingham, Alabama. That happened less than 10 years ago. When violence erupts inside of a hospital, the damage exceeds far beyond that original tragedy. Families lose loved ones. Doctors, nurses, and hospital staff are traumatized. The hospitals face financial and reputational damage, sometimes that lasts for years. So why don't hospitals get in front of this and put security measures in place? Again, mostly they cite cost. They're looking at $300,000 to $400,000 a year to put metal detectors at every entrance and put staff on those metal detectors to monitor the equipment. $300,000 to $400,000 a year. That's right. Your life is worth less than $300,000 to $400,000 a year for medical facilities that are making millions. That's how much we mean to them. We're just a number on a page, an amount on a form. I know I primarily cover things that are going on in Alabama, and something that happened in Alabama did spark this conversation, but this is something that's happened all around the United States. And this is a conversation that's happening in several other states that also don't have any guidelines in place, no legislation, nothing to require that hospitals have any minimum of security. So I'm proposing that. I propose that Alabama put legislation in place that requires hospitals to have metal detectors at the very least. They don't even have to be freestanding. They can be the handheld kind. But there needs to be somebody there with a metal detector monitoring who is going inside of hospitals. This is 2026. Gun violence in the United States doesn't show any signs of slowing down. But there are things that we can do to protect everybody. And the one place that you should be safe from a firearm is the place where babies come into the world. I think that should be a minimum expectation. Hospitals occupy a unique place in our communities. They must remain open 24 hours a day. They are a place where strangers can go in a time of crisis. But because hospitals are open 24 hours a day, they have a unique set of security challenges. Unlike any other public institution, administrators must constantly balance compassion, accessibility, and safety. But updating safety protocols will do exactly that. Added security in hospitals will come with a high price tag. But when violence enters the halls of a hospital, it costs a lot more than dollars. It costs lives. It costs healthcare workers. It costs people who don't want to be in the field anymore because they feel like the administrators are not protecting them. It costs patients who don't want to go in those hospitals anymore because they no longer feel safe in that facility. And all of this leaves communities in Alabama and across the United States asking, how safe should hospitals be? Now, I want to thank every single one of y'all for hanging out with me tonight on the porch with Munchies and Murder as we dove deep on an Alabama issue again. I hope every single one of y'all have a good week. Join me back here again next Sunday while we dive deep again on crime, corruption, and that good old boy system in the state of Alabama. Y'all have a good week now.